Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, and all participants. I am happy to be at this session presenting the call to action. But before I get to reading what is there, I just want to register an apology that what we are going to project is basically the draft that you read. We received all your comments and we have taken them into consideration. The challenge that we had, though, is that we had each one of you sending feedback, and therefore it was not possible for us to incorporate it, or the Secretariat to incorporate it in. But we do pledge that these comments will be included in the proceedings of the conference, and therefore your views will be reflected therein. Am I excused? Yes. All right, thank you. We, the participants of the Continental Conference on Access to Justice for Children in Africa, is not projected? I'll start then with the cover page, Access to Justice for Children in Africa, call to action dated 9th May 2018, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We, the participants of the Continental Conference on Access to Justice for Children in Africa, titled Spotlighting the Invisible, held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia from the 8th to the 9th May, following up on the 2011 Kampala Conference and its outcomes, recognize the advance and lasting impact that gaps in the access to justice have on children in Africa. We also acknowledge that African countries are making strides towards improved access to justice for children in Africa. The path of justice is marked by, among other things, law and policy reform processes at national level, which recognize the rights of children in the justice system, as well as progressive growth in services that give effect to the laws. Despite this progress, a lot remains to be done to make access to justice a reality for the children on the continent. In particular, we are concerned that children remain predominantly invisible in the justice system in Africa, including due to lack of robust collection of disaggregated data, and that efforts to enhance justice for children have been piecemeal and insufficiently embedded in justice systems. This results in the fragmentation of child protection systems, denial of their rights, lack of institutionalized systems, and has overall negative implications for the sustainability of interventions in this regard. We are also concerned that efforts to address the layered vulnerability of specific groups of children in accessing justice remain inadequate in many African countries. Furthermore, the overlapping nature of formal, customary, and other legal frameworks and justice system is not adequately documented or consistent across the continent, which makes it difficult to determine the manner in which children engage with these mechanisms. As a result, informal justice mechanisms in Africa remain largely unaccountable, and the children who access justice through them are vulnerable to violations of their rights. 3. We therefore need action to ensure that the laws and policies in African countries are harmonized with regional and international treaties and standards on child justice as a basis for providing protection to children in the justice system. It is, however, not sufficient to domesticate the legal standards. We must take deliberate, urgent, and prioritized measures to implement them. We acknowledge that though access to justice is a fundamental enabler of other rights of the child, it cannot be achieved in isolation. A systems approach and multi-sectoral coordination process in delivering access to justice for children is necessary to ensure optimum response in the needs of a child in need of justice. Following our deliberations at this conference, we call upon all stakeholders to take action to accelerate the fulfillment of access to justice for children in Africa as follows. 1. African governments. 2. 1. ensure that national laws on access to justice are consistent with international and regional standards on child justice and are fully implemented. 2, gather, evaluate, and publish disaggregated data on children in contact with the justice system, including through responses to calls for information by the UN independent expert leading the global study on child deprivation children deprived of liberty. 3, develop specialized child justice systems in all parts of the country, including facilities, police units, medical units, social legal support, and child judges, which are adequately resourced. 4, ensure that child justice systems are cognizant of the specific needs of children in situations of vulnerability, including children with disabilities, girls, child migrants, children without parental care, and child victims of organized crime. And finally, for African governments, recognize the existence of and regulate the interaction of informal mechanisms of justice with children to ensure that the rights and best interests of children are protected in the use of the mechanism, and that the universal standards of access to justice are observed. AU organs and treaty bodies. The African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the committee, to engage African countries on the use of guidelines on action for children in the justice system in Africa, which the committee endorsed in 2012, including through the state party reporting process. 2, the Peace and Security Council to engage African countries to take steps to ensure that children in situations of conflict access justice effectively and in a timely manner. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. Encourage states to include the implementation of guidelines on action for children in the justice system in Africa in their periodic reports. Civil society organizations, international non-governmental organizations, UN agencies, and academic institutions. 1, undertake research on access to justice in Africa, document good practices, good and practical models for enhancing justice access to justice for children in Africa. I'll read that again. Undertake research on access to justice in Africa, document good and practical models in enhancing access to justice for children in Africa. 2, facilitate cross-country learning on effective models of facilitating and enhancing access to justice for children in Africa. And 3, take concrete steps, including litigation, accompanied by a robust media and advocacy and civic education to address specific issues relating to children in contact or conflict with the law. Development and multilateral partners. Include the informal justice sector in the rule of law programs and ensure that support to justice reforms invest in the strength of informal justice mechanisms. 2, support government efforts to mainstream dimensions that cater to vulnerable groups of children in child-friendly justice initiatives, including consciously articulating the issues of vulnerable groups in all programming and training programs for role players involved in child-friendly justice. The organizers of this conference undertake to following up on these recommendations. There is an imperative on all of us to act now, as the future for the continent depends on ensuring justice for children today. Thank you.
Stella, thank you very much. I'd like to ask now for a motion from the floor.